My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I was 24 years old when I realized the people who should have lifted me up only wanted to keep me on my knees. If you've ever lived in a house where love came with conditions, you'll understand what I'm about to share. Growing up, my parents weren't cruel in the way people imagine. They didn't hit me or scream at me daily. Their cruelty was quieter, disguised as responsibility, wrapped in the lie of family duty. From as early as I could remember, I wasn't just their daughter. I was their housemaid. By 10, I knew how to mop the floors so they gleamed. By 12, I was cooking full dinners while my mother criticized the seasoning. By 14, my father expected me to iron his shirts perfectly or face his scornful laugh. "Sarah, you'll never be worth anything if you can't even handle this." What hurt most wasn't the work. It was that no matter how much I did, it was never enough. If relatives visited, my parents would smile, brag about how responsible I was, and then send me to clear the plates while my younger brother, Daniel, sat at the table soaking up praise. He was the golden child. Straight A's or not, Daniel could do no wrong.
Me?
I could scrub the house until my hands bled, and my mother would still find a streak on the glass. At 22, when most of my friends were moving into apartments and building lives, I was still stuck in that house, folding laundry at midnight, wondering if anyone would ever see me as more than free labor. My parents didn't believe in me working outside. "Why chase some silly job when you can help here at home?" my mother said. Family first. But family first really meant us first, you last. The breaking point, the night that set this whole story in motion, came when I was 24. My father had invited a group of business associates to dinner. He was desperate to impress them because one of them, Mr. Harris, was rumored to have close ties to a powerful CEO who could open doors. I didn't know much about business back then, but I knew my father's eyes gleamed with hunger whenever he spoke about these dinners. All afternoon I cooked. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, a layered cake for dessert. I scrubbed the dining room until it looked like a showroom. I set the table with my grandmother's china, polishing each glass until it shone. By the time the doorbell rang, my hair was sticking to my forehead, my hands red from hot water, but my parents didn't care. "Sarah," my mother hissed as the first guest stepped in. "Smile, but don't speak unless spoken to. You're here to help, not to be seen." Those words sank into me like stones. Help, not be seen. That was my role. That had always been my role. The evening blurred into a cycle of fetching drinks, carrying trays, refilling plates. My brother sat with the guests, laughing, talking, while I hovered behind like a ghost. My parents bragged about Daniel's achievements, his internships, his bright future. No one asked about me. No one ever did. And then it happened. Near the end of the night, as I carried in the dessert, one of the guests, a tall man in his 50s with sharp eyes, paused mid-conversation. He looked directly at me. "Sarah, right?" he asked. I froze, almost dropping the cake. No one ever remembered my name. "Yes, sir," I whispered, unsure what else to say. He smiled slightly. "I've heard about you." Before I could respond, my father barked a laugh. "Oh, she's just our little helper. Nothing to fuss over. Daniel's the one you should be talking to." But the man didn't look away. His gaze stayed on me, sharp and assessing, like he saw something no one else had bothered to notice. Later, after the guests had left and my parents were glowing with self-satisfaction, my father turned to me. "You did fine tonight," he said gruffly. "But don't get ideas. No one's here for you. Your background."
Background.
That word echoed in my mind all night as I scrubbed the kitchen clean. Background, as though I wasn't even part of the story of my own life. What my father didn't know was that the man who had noticed me, his name was Charles Harris, wasn't just a random associate. He was the trusted partner of the very CEO my father was desperate to impress. And in that one glance, he had already seen something my parents refused to acknowledge, that I wasn't invisible. But I didn't know that yet. At the time, all I knew was exhaustion. I crawled into bed with aching arms and a heart that felt hollow. I wanted to believe there was more for me than this cycle of servitude, but every voice in my life said otherwise. My parents, my brother, even distant relatives, they all saw me as the one who served, not the one who led. Still, deep down, a tiny ember burned. A voice that whispered, "One day, they'll see." I didn't know how or when or even if it was possible. But that ember kept me alive, even in the darkest moments. And it would ignite sooner than I ever imagined. Because within weeks, the same man who had looked at me across that dinner table would call me something no one had ever dared to before. Not maid, not helper, not background, but boss. The morning after that dinner, my parents behaved as if nothing had happened. My father strutted around the house, bragging about how impressed his guests had been, how Daniel had carried himself like a real man of business. My mother nodded proudly, already planning the next dinner to showcase her perfect son. And me? I was back in the kitchen, scrubbing pans blackened from the roasted chicken, my arms sore, my hair tied messily out of my face. My father passed by once, glancing at me, and said with a smirk, "Good work, Sarah. You're starting to act like part of the team. Keep it up." Part of the team. He didn't even call me family anymore. But I couldn't get that man's look out of my head. Mr. Harris, I'd later learn. The way his eyes had lingered on me, not with pity or disdain, but with curiosity, maybe even respect. It had felt foreign. It had felt dangerous, like the first crack of light in a dark room. 2 weeks later, that light returned. I was out running errands for my mother, lugging bags of groceries through town. I hated those errands. They made me feel like a pack mule carrying everyone else's burdens. I was pushing through the crowd when I heard a voice behind me. "Sarah?" I turned, nearly dropping the grocery bags. There he was, Mr. Harris, standing in a crisp gray suit, his expression calm but sharp. "Why, yes," I stammered. He smiled faintly. "I thought it was you. We met at your father's dinner a couple weeks ago." I nodded quickly, flustered. "Yes, sir. I remember." He studied me for a moment, then tilted his head. "Do you always run around like this? Carrying half a store on your shoulders?" Heat rushed to my cheeks. "My mother needed a few things," I said softly. "Ah." His eyes flickered, but he didn't press. Instead, he said, "Do you have a moment? I'd like to talk to you properly, if that's all right." Every instinct told me to refuse, to scurry back home before my parents realized I was gone. But something stronger, something that ember inside me, made me nod. "All right." We sat at a cafe nearby. I remember sitting stiffly, afraid someone I knew would see us and report back to my parents. But Mr. Harris put me at ease quickly. "Your father spoke a great deal about Daniel," he began. "But he said very little about you." I found that interesting. I let out a bitter laugh before I could stop myself. "He doesn't think I'm worth much." Mr. Harris leaned forward. "And what do you think?" The question caught me off guard. No one had ever asked me that. What did I think? I hesitated, then whispered, "I think I could be more, if anyone gave me the chance." For a long moment he just studied me. Then he smiled. "That's exactly what I thought." He explained that he worked closely with a CEO, someone my father idolized. The company was looking for fresh minds, people who weren't afraid of hard work, but who also had vision. "You struck me as someone who's been underestimated," he said. "I notice things others don't. And I think you might have potential." Potential? The word felt like a lifeline. I left the cafe with his business card clutched in my hand, my heart pounding. When I got home, I tucked it inside my journal, terrified my parents would find it. Of course, they noticed my smile that evening. "What's gotten into you?" my mother asked suspiciously. "Nothing," I said quickly, burying myself in laundry. But for the first time in years, nothing felt like everything. The weeks that followed were a blur. Mr. Harris called me once, just to check in. We spoke cautiously, me always with one ear out for my parents. He encouraged me to think about what I wanted, what I was good at. It felt strange, like flexing muscles I'd forgotten I had. But then my parents began tightening their grip. One evening, I overheard them talking in the dining room. "She's getting distracted," my mother said. "She didn't polish the silver properly yesterday. And she's been daydreaming." My father snorted. "Don't worry. She's got no options. She wouldn't survive a day without us. She knows it. The words cut deep, but instead of breaking me, they stoked the fire inside. One night, I pulled out my journal and the business card. I stared at Mr. Harris's name, his number, the sleek company logo embossed at the top. My hands trembled as I whispered to myself, maybe I don't have to survive on their terms. Still, fear was a heavy chain. What if I failed? What if my parents were right? What if Mr. Harris was wrong about me? The breaking point came when my parents hosted another dinner. Once again, I cooked, cleaned, and served while Daniel basked in the spotlight. This time, though, my father was almost giddy. "The CEO himself is coming," he whispered to my mother, not knowing I overheard. If I can impress him, this could change everything. That night, I worked harder than ever, setting the table so perfectly it could have been photographed for a magazine. My parents fussed over Daniel, dressing him in a new suit, rehearsing lines for him to say. I stood in the kitchen, wearing an apron, my hair tied back, hands raw from scrubbing. When the doorbell rang and the CEO stepped in, a tall, commanding man with sharp eyes, I didn't expect him to look at me twice. But then I saw it. Mr. Harris was with him. And when his gaze met mine, he gave the faintest nod, like a silent promise. My parents didn't notice. They were too busy groveling, fawning, laughing too loudly at every word the CEO said. They shoved Daniel forward, desperate to showcase their star. And me? I carried the trays, poured the drinks, cleared the plates, just as I always had. But for the first time, I felt different. Not invisible, not worthless. Different. Because I knew something my parents didn't. The ember inside me wasn't dying. It was about to catch fire. And when it did, the very man they were desperate to impress wouldn't be praising them. He would be calling me something they could never imagine. Boss. The night of the dinner began like every other. Me in the kitchen, apron tied too tightly, sleeves rolled up, my parents barking orders like generals before a battle. Except this wasn't just another dinner. This was the dinner. The CEO, Michael Whitaker, was coming. A man my father had idolized for years, someone whose name carried weight in every business circle in the city. My father's hands shook as he straightened his tie. My mother wore her best dress, a sharp smile plastered across her face. And Daniel, of course, was the centerpiece. Freshly tailored suit, hair slicked back, rehearsed lines about his bright future. "Don't mess this up, Sarah," my mother hissed as she checked the silverware for the third time. "If there's even a smudge on a glass, I'll know who to blame." I bit my tongue, nodding, though inside my chest was tight with resentment. Mess it up? I had prepared everything. The roast was perfect, the potatoes golden, the table immaculate. I had built the entire evening with my bare hands, and yet I would be invisible again. The doorbell rang. My father nearly tripped rushing to open it, his face flushed with excitement. "Mr. Whitaker, what an honor," he gushed, shaking the CEO's hand like a drowning man grabbing a rope. I peeked from the kitchen doorway and froze. Behind Mr. Whitaker stood Mr. Harris. His sharp eyes found mine instantly, and again, that subtle nod, calm, steady, like he knew something no one else did. "Please come in," my mother chimed, ushering them inside. "This is our son, Daniel." She practically pushed him forward, beaming. Daniel extended his hand, smug confidence dripping from every gesture. "It's an honor, sir. I've admired your company for years." The CEO shook his hand politely, then glanced around the room. His gaze brushed over me for the briefest moment, but he said nothing. My parents didn't even introduce me. Dinner began. My father cracked jokes that fell flat. My mother gushed about Daniel's grades, his leadership skills, his potential. They spoke as if rehearsing lines from a play, every sentence designed to impress. And me? I floated in and out of the room, serving dishes, refilling glasses, clearing plates. I kept my head down, but I could feel Mr. Harris's eyes following me at times, measuring, waiting. Halfway through the meal, the conversation shifted. Mr. Whitaker asked Daniel about his ambitions. "I plan to take over the family business," Daniel said smoothly, glancing at my father. "And eventually, I'd love to work under someone like you, sir." My father's chest swelled with pride. My mother clapped lightly, as though Daniel had just recited poetry. Then, unexpectedly, Mr. Whitaker leaned back in his chair and said, "And what about you? Do you have a daughter?" My father's smile faltered. For a split second, he looked annoyed. Then he forced a laugh. "Oh, Sarah? She helps out around the house. She's good with chores." The words landed like stones in my stomach. Just helps out around the house. As if 24 years of my life, of my blood and sweat and sacrifice, amounted to nothing more than a rag and a mop. I froze in the doorway, gripping the tray so tightly my knuckles whitened. My face burned, tears pricking at the corners of my eyes, but I forced myself to keep moving. I set the tray down, head bowed, and slipped back into the kitchen. Through the walls, I heard my father's booming voice again, steering the conversation back to Daniel. My mother's laughter followed, high-pitched and false. I leaned against the counter, my chest heaving. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw every plate, every glass, every knife I had polished until my hands blistered. Just helps out around the house. That's what I was to them. Nothing more. But then I remembered Mr. Harris. The way he had looked at me at the cafe. The way he had nodded tonight. And slowly, I steadied myself. When dessert time came, I carried the cake into the dining room, my posture straighter, my steps slower. Mr. Whitaker looked up as I set the dish down, his eyes flickering with something I couldn't read. Mr. Harris, though, he gave me the faintest smile. Encouragement. Recognition. The conversation continued, my parents and Daniel piling on compliments, desperate for approval. But then, as if deliberately cutting through their noise, Mr. Whitaker asked, "And Sarah, what do you do?" The room fell silent. My father's fork clattered against his plate. My mother's smile froze. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. She helps out. My father stammered. "You don't need to trouble yourself with that." But Mr. Whitaker's gaze stayed on me. I asked her. I swallowed hard, my hands trembling at my sides. For years, I had been told to stay quiet, to keep my head down. My parents' voices echoed in my head. "Don't embarrass us. Don't speak unless spoken to. You're not worth attention." But now I was being spoken to, and something inside me refused to shrink. "I manage the household," I said softly at first, then stronger. "I organize everything, meals, schedules, cleaning, even the finances sometimes. My parents rely on me for all of it." My father shot me a glare that could have burned a hole through steel. My mother's lips pressed into a thin, furious line. But Mr. Whitaker only leaned back, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "Interesting," he said. "That sounds like management to me. And management is no small skill." The air grew heavy. My parents laughed awkwardly, trying to dismiss it, but I saw it. The flicker in Mr. Whitaker's expression, the approval in Mr. Harris's eyes. For the rest of the evening, I moved quietly, but something had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't just a shadow in a room. I was seen. When the guests left, my parents turned on me like wolves. "What were you thinking?" My father snapped, his face red with rage. "Speaking like that in front of him? You made us look ridiculous. You embarrassed us," my mother hissed. "You're supposed to help, not talk. Can't you understand that?" Daniel smirked from the corner, smug and satisfied. "She'll ruin everything if you keep letting her hang around." Their words pelted me like stones, but this time, I didn't crumble. This time, I stood taller, my heart pounding with something new. Because I had seen the look in Mr. Whitaker's eyes. And I knew, deep down, that this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. The morning after the CEO's visit, the house felt like a battlefield. My father's heavy footsteps echoed across the kitchen tiles as he paced, muttering under his breath. My mother sat at the table, her coffee untouched, her eyes cold as ice. And me? I stood at the sink, washing plates that already gleamed, my hands raw from scrubbing, my ears burning with the silence that hung between us. Finally, my father spun on his heel. "You made me look like a fool, Sarah." I froze, the soapy sponge slipping from my fingers. "You think anyone cared about your little speech?" he snarled. You sounded pathetic, like a desperate maid trying to act important. My mother's voice cut in, sharp as glass. We told you not to speak unless spoken to. And when you were spoken to, you embarrassed us. Do you know how hard your father has worked to get Mr. Whitaker to our table?
Do you?
My lips trembled, but I managed to whisper. He asked me directly. What was I supposed to do? Stay silent. Yes, my father thundered.
Exactly that.
Silence is your role. You're not Daniel. You're not the future of this family. Your background. That word again.
Background.
I bit my lip until I tasted blood, holding back the tears that threatened to spill. Because I knew if I cried, they'd smirk, they'd call me weak, they'd tell me I was proving them right. Daniel strolled in, hair messy from sleep, but smugness intact.
Don't worry, Dad.
Mr. Whitaker clearly saw who the real star was. He won't waste time on Sarah. They all laughed then, my father, my mother, my brother, as if I weren't standing right there, as if I were invisible again. But I wasn't invisible anymore. I couldn't be. Not after the way Mr. Whitaker had looked at me. Not after the faint smile from Mr. Harris. For the first time in my life, someone outside these walls had seen me. And that spark was enough to keep me standing when all I wanted to do was collapse. The following days were worse. My parents tightened their control, as if they sensed I was slipping through their fingers. My chores doubled. Every mistake, real or imagined, was magnified. My father barked at me constantly. Wipe harder. Cook faster. Stop daydreaming. My mother hovered over me, nitpicking everything from how I folded laundry to how I set the table. At night, I collapsed into bed, exhausted, my body aching, my mind spiraling. But each time I closed my eyes, I saw Mr. Whitaker's face, heard his words. That sounds like management to me. One evening, a week after the dinner, the phone rang. I was in the hallway, dusting picture frames, when I heard my father's booming voice shift into something smoother, almost oily. Mr. Harris. What a surprise. Yes, dinner was wonderful. Daniel was excellent, wasn't he? The CEO was impressed, I could tell. I froze, my heart hammering. Mr. Harris. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught enough. My father gushed about Daniel, about opportunities, about how their family was ready to be part of something bigger. And then, after a pause, his tone darkened. Sarah? Oh, she's nothing to worry about. Just a helper. She doesn't have the head for business. Don't let her distract you. My chest burned. He was cutting me out, erasing me. When he hung up, he caught me in the hallway. His eyes narrowed. Don't think you can worm your way into this. Harris called because of Daniel, not you. If I catch you meddling, you'll regret it. I nodded quickly, biting my tongue. But inside, fury raged. Later that night, when the house was quiet, I crept into my room and pulled out the card Mr. Harris had given me. My hands shook as I dialed the number, whispering a prayer he would answer. Sarah, his calm voice came through after the second ring. I was wondering when you'd call. I nearly cried with relief. I'm sorry. My father, he says, he thinks. Your father says what he's always said, Mr. Harris interrupted gently. That you're invisible. But I don't think you are. And neither does Mr. Whitaker. My breath caught. He noticed me? Noticed you. Mr. Harris chuckled softly. He asked me about you afterward. Said you carried yourself with more poise in a single answer than your brother did all night. He was intrigued. Tears welled in my eyes. Intrigued. By me. Mr. Harris's tone grew serious. Sarah, I won't lie. Your father will try to keep you under his thumb. But you have a choice. If you want to step out, if you want to see what you're capable of, I can help you. The question is, do you want that? I clutched the phone tighter, my voice trembling.
Yes.
More than anything. Good, he said. Then be ready. Opportunities don't wait forever. When I hung up, I lay back on my bed, staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding with fear and hope in equal measure. For the first time, I had a glimpse of another life. A life where I wasn't the maid. A life where I could be something more. But my parents weren't going to make it easy. The next day, my mother cornered me in the kitchen. "You've been distracted," she hissed, her eyes cold. "Don't think I don't notice. Whatever silly dreams you're cooking up, forget them. This family doesn't have room for your fantasies." She grabbed my chin, forcing me to look at her. "You belong here. Serving. That's all you'll ever be." I yanked away, my chest heaving. For once, I didn't nod. I didn't whisper, "Yes, Mom." I just turned and walked out, my legs shaking, my hands trembling, but my heart roaring. Because now I knew the truth. I wasn't background. I wasn't invisible. And one day soon, the very people who had chained me to this house, who had used me, belittled me, erased me, those same people would watch me stand in the light. And they wouldn't be able to call me Maid anymore. They'd have to call me something else.
Boss.
The weeks that followed felt like living with a chain around my neck, one my parents yanked tighter every time I tried to breathe. They had sensed something shifting, though they didn't know exactly what. My father barked more orders than ever. My mother invented chores just to keep me busy. Daniel smirked constantly, smug in his role as the future. One night, as I scrubbed the kitchen floor on my knees, my father loomed above me. "Don't get any ideas about Mr. Whitaker," he sneered. "He's not for you. He's for Daniel. You wouldn't last 5 minutes in his world." I bit my tongue, my knees burning against the tiles, my pride bleeding. But even as I scrubbed, I thought of Mr. Harris's words, "Opportunities don't wait forever." And then one evening, opportunity knocked, literally. I was folding laundry when the doorbell rang. My father, Daniel, and my mother were still out at some networking event, so I answered. Standing on the porch was a courier in a crisp uniform holding an envelope. "For Sarah Mitchell," he said. I froze. "Me?" "Yes, ma'am. Signature, please." My hands shook as I signed. When I closed the door, I stared at the envelope like it might vanish. My name, was written across the front in bold, elegant handwriting. I tore it open with trembling fingers. Inside was a formal letter. The header bore the logo of Whitaker Enterprises. "Miss Mitchell, it was a pleasure meeting you recently. Mr. Harris has spoken highly of your abilities and potential. We would like to extend an invitation for you to visit our offices and meet with members of our leadership team. Please contact us at your earliest convenience to arrange a time. Signed, Michael Whitaker, CEO." My vision blurred with tears. He saw me. He wanted to meet me, not my father, not Daniel, not the family name.
Me.
But joy quickly turned to fear. If my parents found this letter, they'd destroy it. They'd forbid me from going. They might even lock me in this house. So I hid it. I slipped it between the pages of my journal and buried it deep under my mattress. The next morning, as my parents returned from their event, my father grumbled about Daniel not networking hard enough. My mother fussed over his tie. No one noticed the secret pounding in my chest, the fire growing stronger with every passing second. That week, I made my choice. I called the number in the letter and arranged a meeting. When the day arrived, I lied to my parents. The grocery store was out of flour. I told my mother, "I'll walk to the next town over and check." She barely looked up from her newspaper, just muttered, "Fine. Don't take too long. Dinner won't cook itself." The walk to Whitaker Enterprises felt surreal. The towering glass building rose like a cathedral of light, reflecting the sky. My reflection stared back at me in the mirrored doors. Plain cream sweater, simple jeans, hair brushed but not styled. I looked nothing like the powerful people rushing past me. I almost turned back. But then I remembered my father's words. You wouldn't last 5 minutes in his world. And I pushed the doors open. Inside, I was greeted by sleek marble floors, polished steel elevators, and a receptionist who smiled warmly when I gave my name. "Of course, Miss Mitchell. They're expecting you. They're expecting me." Moments later, I was ushered into a conference room. Mr. Harris rose to greet me, his smile genuine.
"Sarah.
You came." And then, from the other end of the table, Michael Whitaker himself stood. The CEO. The man my parents worshipped. His presence filled the room, calm but commanding. "Miss Mitchell," he said, extending his hand. "I'm glad you accepted my invitation." My throat tightened, as I shook his hand. "Thank you for having me, sir." We sat. They asked me questions, not about business strategies I didn't know yet, but about life. About how I managed a household, how I organized, how I solved problems when things went wrong. I spoke honestly, my voice trembling at first, then steadier as I realized they weren't mocking me. They were listening. At one point, Mr. Whitaker leaned back, studying me. "You know," he said, "what you've described is the foundation of leadership. People underestimate it, but running a home, especially in difficult circumstances, takes skill. You have an instinct for management." I nearly broke down right there. All my life, my parents had reduced me to a servant. And here, in this room, the CEO they idolized was calling me something else entirely, a leader. By the time I left, they had offered me a position, an entry-level role in project coordination. Nothing glamorous, nothing flashy. But it was mine. My start. My doorway into another life. I walked home that evening with the letter of confirmation clutched to my chest, tears streaming down my cheeks. But reality hit as soon as I stepped through the front door. My father was waiting, arms crossed, eyes blazing. "Where the hell were you?" I froze. I told Mom. I went to the next town for flour. "Don't lie to me," he snapped. "You were gone for hours. Where are you hiding?" My heart raced. If he found the letter, it was over. "Nothing," I whispered. "I just walked too far." He glared at me for a long moment, then finally growled. "Don't think I don't see it. You've been different lately. Distracted. If you mess this up for Daniel, you'll regret it." I nodded quickly, retreating to my room. Once the door was shut, I collapsed on the bed, clutching my confirmation letter. My father's threat echoed in my mind, but so did Mr. Whitaker's words. "You have an instinct for management." For the next few weeks, I lived a double life. By day, I was still the maid, scrubbing, cooking, bending under my parents' commands. By night, I studied, trained, prepared for my new role. Mr. Harris mentored me, teaching me the basics of corporate structure, leadership, communication. I scribbled notes in my journal, hiding them under the mattress. But secrets have a way of surfacing. One evening, after a particularly brutal day of chores, I returned to my room and found my journal on the floor. Open. Pages splayed. My heart stopped. My mother appeared in the doorway, holding the confirmation letter. Her smile was venomous. "So, this is what you've been hiding." I lunged for it, but she pulled it back. "You think you can just run off to play businesswoman? Don't be ridiculous. You belong here." My father appeared behind her, face red with fury. "You dare go behind our backs? You dare embarrass us like this?" I shook, clutching the bedpost to stay upright. "It's my life. My chance. I can't stay here forever." "You'll do as you're told," he roared. "As long as you live under this roof, you're ours. Don't forget it." That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my confirmation letter locked in my mother's drawer. My parents thought they had won, but they didn't understand. I had already stepped into another world. And soon, very soon, they would see it. Because the day was coming when I would walk into a room they could never enter, stand before the man they worshipped, and be called something that would shatter their illusion forever.
Boss.
The morning after my mother found the letter, the air in the house was poisonous. She moved like a shadow, silent but suffocating, her eyes cutting into me with every glance. My father barely spoke at all, but when he did, his words dripped with menace. "You think you're clever?" he growled once as I set down his breakfast plate. "You think you can outsmart us? That company won't take you seriously. And even if they do, we'll make sure they know exactly who you are, our little maid." My stomach twisted, but I said nothing. For years, silence had been my shield, my survival. But this time, silence wasn't submission. It was strategy. I already had a plan. 2 nights later, when my parents went out to another networking dinner, I snuck into my mother's room. My hands shook as I opened her drawer, rifling past jewelry boxes and scarves until I found it, the confirmation letter, folded neatly, locked in a plastic sleeve. I slipped it out, pressing it against my chest like stolen treasure. Back in my room, I tucked it safely into my backpack. Then, before fear could drag me back down, I whispered to myself, "This isn't theirs. It's mine." The next morning, I told my parents I was visiting a friend from school. My mother scoffed, my father snorted, but they didn't stop me. They were too convinced I had no real friends left, too arrogant to believe I could have a life beyond their reach. I took the bus into the city. The Whitaker Enterprises building loomed ahead, its mirrored windows gleaming in the sun. My palms were sweaty as I pushed through the revolving doors, but the receptionist smiled when I said my name. "Welcome back, Miss Mitchell." Miss Mitchell. Not maid. Not helper. Miss Mitchell. Upstairs, Mr. Harris greeted me with his usual calm warmth. "I was worried you wouldn't make it," he said. "My parents found the letter," I admitted, voice low. But I couldn't let them stop me. He nodded approvingly. "Good. Because Mr. Whitaker wants to see you." When I stepped into the CEO's office, I expected cold formality. Instead, Michael Whitaker rose from behind his desk and shook my hand firmly.
Sarah.
"I've been looking forward to this." We talked for over an hour. He asked about the skills I'd honed at home, not just chores, but problem-solving, time management, balancing responsibilities. I told him how I'd managed household budgets, handled crises when bills were overdue, even negotiated with repairmen. He listened intently, then said something that made my breath catch. "Do you realize you've been running a small operation your whole life? That's leadership, Sarah. That's resource management, people management, crisis management. Those are skills most people don't learn until their first management job." I blinked, fighting tears. All my life, those tasks had been framed as servitude, humiliation. And here in this office, they were being recognized as proof of my capability. By the end of the meeting, Mr. Whitaker made it official. "We'd like you to join our leadership development program. It's competitive, and it won't be easy. But I believe you have what it takes." I nodded, my voice trembling. "I'll work harder than anyone." He smiled. "That's what I like to hear." Walking out of that building, I felt taller, lighter. For the first time, I wasn't just dreaming about another life. I was stepping into it. But at home, the nightmare continued. That evening, my father was waiting when I returned. His eyes flicked to my backpack, his mouth curling into a sneer. "Where were you?" "I told you," I said carefully. "Visiting a friend." "You're lying," he spat. "I know you went to Whitaker Enterprises. Do you think we're stupid?" My heart pounded, but I lifted my chin. "Yes, I went. And I'm going again. This is my chance, and I'm not letting you take it." The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. Then, suddenly, my father's hand slammed onto the table, rattling the dishes. "You ungrateful brat. After everything we've done for you, you'd betray us like this? Everything you've done for me?" My voice broke into a shout before I could stop it. "You've used me like a servant my whole life. You've treated me like I don't matter, like I'm invisible. Well, guess what? I'm not invisible anymore." My mother gasped, her face white with fury. Daniel, lounging on the couch, snickered. "This is pathetic. You think they'll ever call you anything other than maid?" But inside, I clung to Mr. Whitaker's words. "That's leadership, Sarah." The following weeks were a war zone. My parents tried everything: insults, guilt trips, threats. My father even drove to the company once, demanding to speak with Mr. Whitaker. He came home raging, furious that he hadn't been let past the lobby. "They'll regret crossing me," he muttered, slamming his fists on the counter. But they wouldn't, because Mr. Whitaker wasn't fooled by their act. He had seen through them the way he'd seen through me. Meanwhile, my role at the company grew. I started small, shadowing meetings, organizing projects, but I soaked up everything. I stayed late, asked questions, worked harder than anyone else. Mr. Harris became a mentor, guiding me, encouraging me. And little by little, people began to notice. "Sarah," they'd say in the office. Not Miss Mitchell, not Maid. Just Sarah, like I belonged. Then came the night everything collided. My parents decided to host yet another dinner party, this time to repair their reputation with business associates after rumors spread about my new position. My father invited anyone who would listen, desperate to prove his family was still powerful. I had no intention of attending until Mr. Whitaker himself called me. "Sarah," he said, "your parents extended an invitation to me for this dinner. Normally, I wouldn't go, but I think it might be instructive." My stomach flipped. Instructive. For who? For me? Or for them? When the evening arrived, I walked into that dining room not as their maid, but as an employee of Whitaker Enterprises, dressed in a modest but professional outfit Mr. Harris had helped me choose. My parents froze when they saw me. "What are you doing here?" my mother hissed. "I was invited," I said simply. Before she could argue, the doorbell rang. Mr. Whitaker entered, commanding the room with his presence. My father practically tripped over himself, bowing and scraping. Daniel beamed, sliding into his seat, ready to bask in attention. The dinner began. My parents played their parts, fawning over Daniel, dismissing me whenever I spoke. I stayed quiet, patient. And then, halfway through, it happened. Mr. Whitaker set down his fork and turned to me. "Sarah, would you explain the progress of the project you've been coordinating for us?" The room went still. My father's smile faltered. My mother's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Daniel's smirk disappeared. All eyes turned to me. And in that moment, I felt the weight of every floor I had scrubbed, every insult I had swallowed, every tear I had cried. I lifted my chin, my voice steady. "Yes, Mr. Whitaker," I said, and I began to speak, not as their maid, but as myself. The silence after Mr. Whitaker's questions stretched long enough for me to hear the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. My parents were frozen in disbelief, Daniel staring at me as though the world had tilted on its axis. But inside, I was calm. For the first time in my life, calm. I set down my napkin, folded my hands on the table, and met Mr. Whitaker's steady gaze. "Yes, of course." And then I spoke. I described the project I had been assigned to coordinate, breaking down timelines, deliverables, and how I had reorganized a failing workflow into something efficient. I explained the problem-solving process, how I handled conflict between team members, and the way I balanced budgets so resources weren't wasted. At first, I felt the tremor in my voice, but as I continued, something remarkable happened. The more I spoke, the more the fear fell away. Confidence filled the cracks fear had left behind. My words grew stronger, sharper, my tone more certain. I wasn't guessing. I knew what I was talking about. Because I had lived it. Because, for the first time, I was being asked to share something real. When I finished, Mr. Whitaker nodded slowly, satisfaction flickering across his face. "Excellent work, Sarah. You've demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership I value in my team." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. My father's jaw tightened. My mother's hands shook as she set her fork down. Daniel looked like he'd swallowed glass. And then came the moment that broke everything. Mr. Whitaker turned to my parents and said, in a voice that carried to every corner of the dining room, "You should be very proud of your daughter. She's quickly proving herself as one of our most promising leaders. In fact, her colleagues have already started referring to her as boss." The world seemed to stop.
Boss.
Not maid. Not helper. Not background.
Boss.
My parents' faces drained of color. My father sputtered. "Be boss? That's not possible. She's not just anything," Mr. Whitaker interrupted firmly. "Sarah has earned her place. And from what I've seen, she has more natural leadership than most people I've met in years." Every eye at the table turned toward me. And in that moment, I felt taller than I had ever been. Stronger.
Scene.
My father's fists clenched, his knuckles white, but he couldn't argue. Not here.
Not now.
My mother opened her mouth, but no words came out. Daniel sat in silence, for once without his smirk, his face burning red. I lifted my glass, calm and steady, and said, "Thank you, Mr. Whitaker. I'll continue to give my very best." The rest of the dinner passed in a haze. My parents tried to recover, laughing too loudly, grasping for control, but it was gone. The power they had wielded over me for 24 years evaporated in a single word.
Boss.
When the guests left, the storm broke. My father rounded on me, face red with rage. How dare you? You humiliated us in our own home. No, I said softly but firmly. You humiliated yourselves. I just told the truth. You think you're better than us now? My mother hissed, her eyes wild. No, I said again, steady. I know I'm not less. Daniel sneered from the corner.
This won't last.
You'll screw it up. You always do. I turned to him, meeting his gaze with calm certainty. Maybe. But at least I'll be screwing it up while trying to build something. Not while hiding behind Mom and Dad's approval. For once, he had no comeback. That night, I packed my bags. My parents screamed, begged, threatened, but I didn't waver. The girl who had scrubbed their floors, who had folded their laundry, who had been told she was nothing more than background, she was gone. I left with nothing but a suitcase, a letter of confirmation from Whitaker Enterprises, and a heart full of fire. The weeks that followed weren't easy. The program was grueling, the competition fierce. I stumbled, I doubted, I cried in bathroom stalls when the pressure became too much. But every time, I remembered the look on my parents' faces when Mr. Whitaker called me boss. That memory kept me moving forward. Months later, I stood in the lobby of Whitaker Enterprises, my badge clipped to my blazer, my team waiting for me to lead a meeting. Harris clapped me on the shoulder as I passed. Told you, Sarah. You weren't invisible. You just needed the right room. And he was right. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't a maid. I wasn't background. I was boss. Sometimes, late at night, I think about my parents. I wonder if they sit around their dinner table, whispering about the daughter who slipped through their grasp. I wonder if Daniel still smirks, pretending he didn't lose the role he thought was his birthright. But then I remind myself, it doesn't matter. Because their voices don't define me anymore. What defines me is the choice I made the night I walked out of that house, the decision to believe in myself when no one else did. My parents wanted a maid. The world saw a boss. And in the end, that's exactly who I became.